The moment she stepped through the automated glass doors, Alara Vance was an error in the code. In the gleaming, sterile sanctuary of the Athelgard Codec Invitational, she was a syntax violation, a glitch in a perfect system. A voice, sharp with the casual cruelty of the elite, cut through the low hum of cooling fans and hushed, self-important conversations. Did someone order a pizza? A ripple of condescending chuckles followed, as insubstantial and cold as the conditioned air. Alara didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to register it. The Invitational was less a competition and more a cathedral of code, a place where the high priests of programming gathered to reaffirm their own brilliance. Glass walls stretched 40 stories high, encasing a panoramic view of the sprawling metropolis below a city that ran on the very systems these men and women designed, controlled, and occasionally broke for sport. The air smelled of expensive coffee, ozone from the server racks, and a palpable, suffocating arrogance. Every surface gleamed with minimalist perfection, from the polished chrome legs of the ergonomic chairs to the onyx slabs of the latest generation laptops that sat upon the stark white tables. Here, your worth was measured in processing power, your status defined by the quiet clatter of your mechanical keyboard, and your future determined by the elegance of your algorithms. Into this world walked Alara. She was a ghost from a different reality. Her hoodie, a faded gray relic from a state university whose logo had long since peeled into obscurity, hung loosely on her frame. Her jeans were worn not with the deliberate, fashionable distress sold in boutiques, but with the genuine fraying of time and use. Her feet were clad in simple, scuffed sneakers that made no sound on the polished concrete floor, rendering her approach unnervingly silent. On her back, a simple canvas backpack, its color washed out to a nondescript beige, was a jarring anomaly in a sea of Italian leather briefcases and carbon fiber laptop sleeves. Her presence created a subtle but immediate disruption in the room's electromagnetic field of ego. Conversations paused. Heads turned, first in curiosity, then in a collective, unspoken judgment. They saw not a competitor, but an intruder, an inconvenience, a joke. The judgment was a physical thing, a wave of cold energy that washed over her, designed to make her shrink, to make her turn and flee back to whatever world of mediocrity she had crawled from. But Alara didn't shrink. Her ash-gray eyes, steady and analytical, swept across the room not with intimidation, but with a quiet, unnerving assessment. It was the gaze of a systems administrator checking a network for vulnerabilities, cataloging threats and dismissing irrelevant data. The sneers, the whispers, the overt stares, they were just that. Irrelevant data. Noise. In the fortress of her mind, thick firewalls built over years of discipline filtered it all out, leaving only the signal, the task that lay ahead. She moved toward the registration desk, her path a straight line through the clustered groups of chattering developers. They parted for her instinctively, a subtle, almost magnetic repulsion, as if her apparent poverty were a contagion. At the desk sat Brenda, the event coordinator. Brenda was the human embodiment of the Invitational's aesthetic, flawless, sharp, and exuding an aura of polite, inaccessible superiority. Her nails were a perfect, blood-red manicure. Her smile was a marvel of engineering, wide and bright, yet it never once reached her eyes. "Can I help you?" Brenda's voice was coated in honey but held an edge of surgical steel. She scanned Alara from head to toe, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second too long on the worn fabric of her backpack. The smile tightened. "Alara Vance," Alara said, her voice even and low, devoid of either apology or aggression. "I'm here to check in." Brenda tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her tablet, her eyebrows arching in feigned surprise. "Vance, Vance. Ah, here we are." She looked up, the smile now a weapon of condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right place, sweetie? The spectator and press area is on the mezzanine level. It's much more comfortable up there." It wasn't a question, it was a dismissal, a gentle but firm attempt to escort the anomaly out of the system. In her world, people who looked like Alara were spectators, not players. They were the audience, not the talent. "I'm a contestant," Alara stated simply, her gaze unwavering. The silence that followed was small but potent. Brenda's smile faltered for a nanosecond, a tiny crack in the perfect facade before she recalibrated. "Oh, of course. My mistake." The honey in her voice had curdled slightly. She pushed a laminated badge and a welcome packet across the desk without making eye contact. "Your station is number 37. In the back." "Thank you," Alara said, taking the badge. She didn't react to the subtle insult of being placed in the furthest, least desirable corner of the room. It was another data point, cataloged and filed away. As she walked toward her station, the whispers grew bolder, no longer hushed but spoken in audible, theatrical stage whispers. The reigning champion, a man named Drake, made sure his voice carried. He was leaning against a pillar, surrounded by a clique of acolytes who laughed at his every utterance. Drake was handsome in a severe corporate way, his hair perfectly coiffed, his designer suit sharp enough to cut glass. He was the king of this castle, and he had just spotted a peasant in his court. "Look at that," Drake announced, gesturing with his chin toward Alara. "Ethelgard must be lowering their standards for charity. Maybe she won a raffle." His friends brayed with laughter. Alara continued walking, her posture unchanged. This only seemed to embolden him. He saw her silence not as strength, but as weakness. As she passed, he took a step forward. "Hey, thrift store, you know this is a coding invitational, right? Not a soup kitchen." Alara stopped. The room held its breath, anticipating the confrontation. They wanted a reaction. They craved the drama, the satisfaction of seeing the outsider break. She slowly turned her head, her calm, gray eyes meeting Drake's. For a moment, she said nothing, simply holding his gaze. Drake's smirk began to feel strained under the pressure of her silent scrutiny. He was used to people cowering, or getting angry, or stammering. He wasn't used to being observed, analyzed. Finally, she spoke. "I'm aware." Her voice was a flat line, an acoustic void that absorbed the energy of his insult and gave nothing back. Then, she turned and continued on her way to Station 37. The room exhaled. Drake, feeling his authority momentarily challenged, scoffed loudly to regain control. "Whatever. She won't last 10 minutes. In another corner, Gus, a veteran programmer with a graying ponytail and a cynical twist to his mouth, watched the exchange. He was a man who prided himself on substance over style, but his definition of substance was rigid, forged in the fires of an earlier, supposedly purer era of computing. He shook his head, muttering to a contemporary, "It's a disgrace. They let anyone in these days. Back in my time, you had to earn your place. You had to have respect for the craft. Look at her. She probably thinks Python is a snake." His friend nodded in solemn agreement, and they both turned away, dismissing her as a symptom of a decaying industry. Alara finally reached Station 37. It was, as promised, in the darkest corner of the room, tucked away near a humming server closet. While others had panoramic views of the city, she had a view of a blank gray wall. She didn't mind. The view inside her head was all that mattered. She slid her canvas backpack from her shoulders and placed it on the floor. With practiced, economical movements, she unzipped it. The moment of truth had arrived for the onlookers. What kind of machine would this strange, silent girl produce? A tablet? A cheap, plastic, consumer-grade laptop? What she pulled out was worse than any of them had imagined. It was a battered, chunky gray laptop, a relic from an age they had all forgotten. Its plastic casing was covered in a web of scratches, and a corner was chipped, revealing the metal chassis beneath. The logo on the lid was worn smooth, an unidentifiable silver smudge. When she opened it, the hinges creaked in protest. The keyboard was shiny from years of use, the letters on the most common keys, E, A, S, T, C, worn completely away. A fresh wave of snickers and outright laughter swept the room. It was one thing to look poor. It was another to bring a museum piece to a high-performance race. Drake nearly choked on his artisanal coffee. Is that a ThinkPad from the Mesozoic era? My God, I think I see fossilized amber on the trackpad. Can that thing even run a modern browser, let alone a compiler? Brenda, observing from her throne at the registration desk, allowed a genuine, cruel smile to grace her lips for the first time that day. The girl was a bigger joke than she had imagined. She was clearly in over her head, a walking, talking imposter syndrome case who had somehow slipped through the cracks. Unfazed, Alara placed the old machine on the desk and plugged in a frayed power cord. She pressed the power button. The laptop whirred to life with the loud mechanical groan of an old hard drive spinning up. The screen flickered, then settled on a stark, black display filled with nothing but a single, blinking green cursor. There was no graphical user interface, no desktop, no icons, no windows, just the void and the cursor, waiting. To the others, it looked like the machine had failed to boot. To Alara, it was home. She ignored them all. She ignored the stares, the whispers, the technology shaming. Her world shrank to the size of the 14-inch screen. Her mind, already a quiet and orderly place, became a silent vacuum. The external world with its noise and its judgment ceased to exist. There was only her, the machine, and the problem that was yet to come. She rested her fingers on the worn, familiar keys. Her breathing deepened, slowing to a steady, meditative rhythm. A memory surfaced, unbidden. The voice of her mentor, a woman as old and powerful as the system she commanded, echoing in her mind from years ago. They will see your clothes. They will see your tools. They will see everything but what matters, Alara. Let them. Their blindness is your greatest shield. Their noise is your camouflage. In their world of shouting, learn the power of the whisper. In their world of spectacle, master the art of silence. Alara closed her eyes for a single, long second. The noise of the room faded completely, replaced by the gentle hum of the old laptop's fan. It was the sound of readiness, the sound of power, coiled and waiting. She opened her eyes. The green cursor blinked back at her, a steady heartbeat in the digital darkness. Let them laugh. Let them judge. They were playing a game. She was here to work. The cathedral was beautiful, but she hadn't come to pray. She had come to exorcise its demons, and her old, battered machine wasn't a liability. It was a key, crafted for a lock none of them even knew existed. An expectant hush fell as a man in a flawlessly tailored suit stepped onto the low stage at the front of the room. This was Mr. Corbin, the architect of the Aethelgard Invitational, a man whose name was a byword for innovation in the tech world. He carried himself with the serene confidence of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. A pair of rimless glasses perched on his nose, and his smile was a practiced, avuncular gesture. "Welcome, esteemed colleagues." His voice resonated, smooth and amplified by a hidden microphone. "Welcome to a challenge designed not merely to test your skills, but to test the very philosophy of your craft." He gestured to the massive screen behind him, which until now had been displaying the Aethelgard logo in a hypnotic, rotating animation. The logo dissolved, replaced by a single, ominous word in a stark, monospace font. Aurelian. A collective, audible intake of breath swept through the room, a sound of dread and disbelief. It was a name whispered like a ghost story in the halls of server farms and the late-night forums where old-school coders gathered. The Aurelian system was not just a legacy system. It was a digital fossil, an evolutionary dead end from a forgotten era of computing. It had been built in the chaotic, frontier days of the internet by a single, enigmatic programmer known only as the Architect, a figure who had vanished after its creation, leaving behind a masterpiece of labyrinthine, undocumented code. It was notoriously unstable, famously impenetrable, and legendarily hostile to any modern diagnostic tools. To work on Aurelian was not to code. It was to perform an archaeological dig in a minefield. Your task is simple in its description, yet monumental in its execution, Mr. Corbin continued, a glint of sadistic glee in his eyes. He was enjoying this. Deep within the Aurelian core, a critical security vulnerability, dormant for over 2 decades, has been discovered. It is a zero-day exploit of catastrophic potential. Your objective: find it, patch it, and secure the system. You have 4 hours. The clock starts now. Ho! A digital timer appeared on the screen, its red numerals beginning their relentless descent from 4 hours. For a moment, the room was paralyzed. Then, the chaos began. It started not with the clatter of keyboards, but with the sound of collective complaint. "This is impossible," someone shouted from the front row. The provided emulators can't even properly interface with the Aurelian kernel, another chimed in, her voice strained with panic. Drake slammed his hand on his desk, his carefully constructed composure shattering like dropped glass. This isn't a challenge, it's a farce. You haven't given us the right tools. Our IDEs can't parse this archaic syntax. It's gibberish. He looked around, seeking validation, and found it in the sea of frustrated, nodding heads. Gus, the cynical veteran, was actually pale. He remembered Aurelian not as a legend, but as a real-world nightmare from his early career. "He's right," Gus grumbled, his voice low and bitter. "This isn't about skill, it's a setup. They're testing us with a broken system and broken tools just to watch us fail. There's no honor in it." The room devolved into a cacophony of excuses and accusations. The high priests of code, stripped of their modern rituals and powerful artifacts, were reduced to fearful, angry mortals, shouting at a god who had given them an unsolvable prayer. The air, once thick with arrogance, was now choked with the sour smell of failure before the battle had even truly begun. And in the back corner, at Station 37, Ilara Vance was silent. She had not moved. Her eyes were fixed on the stream of raw data flowing onto her black screen, the ancient code of the Aurelian system rendering as pure, unadorned text. While others saw chaos, she saw a pattern. While they heard noise, she heard a language she understood intimately. Her face was a mask of concentration, her posture perfectly still. It was as if a bubble of absolute silence had formed around her, insulating her from the storm of panic erupting throughout the room. After several long minutes of simply reading, absorbing the flow, the logic, the ghost of the architect's intent, her hand rose slowly. It was a small, hesitant gesture in a room full of flailing egos, but it cut through the noise like a laser. "Mr." Corbin, who was trying to placate the growing mob, paused. "Yes? Station 37? Ilara didn't turn to look at him. Her eyes remained locked on her screen. "I have a query regarding the provided development environment." The room quieted, eager for a new target for their frustration. Drake crossed his arms, a sneer already forming on his lips. This was going to be good. The charity case was about to ask a stupid question. "Go ahead," Mr. Corbin said, his tone a little impatient. "The standard emulation package is insufficient," Ilara began, her voice as flat and precise as a machine's. The Aurelian core was built on a unique architecture. To properly diagnose the memory leak that's causing the vulnerability, I will need access that the sandboxed environment doesn't provide. She took a slight breath. "Can I request root access to the host machine's Layer 7 diagnostic kernel and a Helios-based compiler?" Silence. It was a profound, absolute silence. The kind that follows a statement so bizarre, it momentarily short-circuits the brain. The other contestants stared at her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The terms she used were nonsense, to most of them digital archaeology from a forgotten age. Layer 7 kernel access was a security risk no sane administrator would grant, and Helios, the Helios compiler, hadn't been in standard use for 15 years. It was a relic, a piece of software history. Then the laughter started. It began with Drake, a loud, barking laugh that was more contempt than humor. "A Layer 7 kernel? A Helios compiler?" he bellowed, turning to his friends, his face red with mirth. "Where did you dig up those terms, sweetheart? A computer history museum? Did you read about them on a plaque somewhere? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." The rest of the room joined in, a wave of ridicule washing over Ilara's small station. They saw her request not as a sign of deep, specialized knowledge, but as definitive proof of her ignorance. She was a fraud, stringing together impressive-sounding but meaningless buzzwords to hide the fact that she was hopelessly lost. Brenda, who had been observing the proceedings with a smug detachment, saw her opportunity. She strode from the registration desk, her heels clicking an aggressive rhythm on the concrete floor. She stopped beside Ilara's station, placing a hand on her hip. Her smile was a perfectly sharpened blade of corporate pleasantry. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Brenda said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Her tone was the one you might use on a child asking for ice cream before dinner. "To ensure a level playing field, All contestants must use the standardized tools and environments provided. Granting special access or custom software would be unfair to the other participants. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper. Look, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this is clearly out of your league. There's no shame in admitting it. You can quietly pack up and leave now, and no one has to be embarrassed. End. It was a cruel, public execution disguised as a kind offer. The unjustness of it was staggering. They had given them all a broken puzzle, and when Alara was the only one to ask for the correct, albeit ancient, screwdriver, they accused her of cheating and offered to show her the door. Ilara finally turned her head, her calm gray eyes meeting Brenda's. For a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passed through them. Not anger, not humiliation, but something far older and colder. It was the look of a mountain observing a storm cloud. The cloud could rage and thunder all it wanted. The mountain would remain. Understood, Alara said. That was all. No argument, no defense, no plea. She turned back to her screen, her shoulders squared. She had been denied the proper tools. She had been publicly shamed. She had been utterly and completely isolated. For anyone else, it would have been the end. For Alara, it was merely a change in parameters. A new constraint to be factored into the equation. Brenda stood there for a moment, nonplussed. She had expected tears, or anger, or at least a protest. Alara's quiet acceptance was unnerving, a denial of the victory Brenda had sought. With a frustrated huff, she turned and stalked away. The competition resumed its chaotic rhythm. The room was filled once more with the sounds of muttered curses, furious typing that led nowhere, and the low hum of collective despair. Drake was loudly blaming the hardware. Gus was complaining about the decline of professional standards. They were all losing, but they had at least established one thing to their satisfaction. The strange girl in the corner, the anomaly in their perfect system, was even more of a failure than they were. They left her alone in her corner, a pariah in a sea of her peers. No one spoke to her. No one looked her way except to sneer. She was a ghost at the feast, invisible and irrelevant. And on the black screen of her ancient laptop, the green cursor blinked, steady, patient, waiting for its first command. The world had denied her a key, so she would have to build one from scratch. An hour bled into 2. The red numerals on the timer seemed to mock the assembly of geniuses, each descending second a small testament to their collective failure. The leaderboard, projected onto the giant screen, was a wasteland of zeros. Not a single contestant had made a dent in Aurelian's defenses. The initial panic had curdled into a sullen, resentful resignation. Keyboards that had once clattered with frantic energy now sat mostly silent, punctuated by the occasional, frustrated tap of a single key. Drake had abandoned his station entirely, pacing near the windows with his arms crossed, his face a thunderous mask of bruised pride. Gus was staring blankly at a screen full of incomprehensible code, looking less like a programmer and more like a man contemplating the abyss. The room had become a morgue of ambition. The air was heavy, not with the energy of competition, but with the dead weight of intellectual surrender. They had all hit the same wall. The Aurelian Code was a beast that fought back, a self-aware labyrinth that seemed to actively resist modern methods of analysis. Their sophisticated debuggers crashed, their processors ran hot with useless brute force attacks, and their elegant algorithms dissolved into nonsense against its archaic, illogical logic. They were the best and the brightest, and they had been comprehensively, humiliatingly defeated. All of them except one. In the back corner, at Station 37, there was no surrender. There was no frustration. There was only the quiet, relentless rhythm of work. Alara had not stopped. Her focus was absolute, a singularity that bent the world around it. She had retreated so far into the architecture of the machine that the physical room, with its defeated occupants and ticking clock, had ceased to have any meaning. To any casual observer, it would have looked like she was doing nothing at all. Her screen was still a black void, now filled with scrolling lines of monolithic green text that were indecipherable to anyone but her. She wasn't using a mouse. Her hands, when they moved, flew across the worn keyboard in short, precise bursts. her movements so economical they were almost imperceptible. She wasn't fighting the system, she wasn't attacking it, she was conversing with it, she was coaxing it, reasoning with it, speaking its own long-forgotten language. She was finding the cracks not by force, but by listening to the echoes in its empty spaces. In the elevated control booth overlooking the competition floor, Mr. Corbin watched her on a dedicated monitor, his brow furrowed. Beside him, two of his top system architects, a man named Leo and a woman named Mara, stared at their own screens, which displayed telemetry from Alara's station. "What is she doing?" Mara murmured, her voice a mixture of confusion and awe. "Her CPU usage is almost zero. She's not running any of the standard diagnostic suites. Her network traffic is just a series of low-level pings. It's quiet, too quiet." Leo leaned closer to his monitor, zooming in on the command line Alara was using. His eyes widened. "My God," he whispered. "That syntax. I've only ever seen that in one place." He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Those aren't modern commands. That's a direct machine code injection, written in the architect's own proprietary shorthand. It's a signature." Mr. Corbin adjusted his glasses, a strange light dawning in his eyes. The architect's signature was the stuff of legend, a coding fingerprint rumored to be so unique that it acted as a master key within the system, but no one had ever been able to replicate it. It was considered a myth. "She's not hacking the system from the outside," Leo said, his voice hushed with realization. "She's waking it up from the inside." On the floor, no one noticed. They were too absorbed in their own failure. Drake had finally returned to his seat, not to work, but to start typing a furious screed on a tech blog, blaming the organizers for the unprofessional and frankly insulting nature of the challenge. It was then that Alara's movements changed. Her rapid bursts of typing ceased. She sat back, her posture straight, and for a moment, simply watched the stream of data. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached into her faded canvas backpack. A few tired eyes glanced over, expecting her to finally admit defeat and pack up. Instead, she produced a small, unassuming object, a simple, gray USB flash drive. It had no branding, no logos, no markings of any kind. It was as plain and anonymous as she was. In an environment filled with high-speed, encrypted solid-state drives, her simple plastic stick looked like another pathetic anachronism. With the same deliberate calm, she inserted it into the single USB port on the side of her ancient laptop. In the control booth, alarms blared. "Unauthorized hardware insertion at Station 37, Mara yelled, her hands flying over her console. "Protocol is to lock the terminal immediately. I'm cutting her off." "Wait," Mr. Corbin commanded, his voice sharp, holding up a hand. "Let's see what happens." On Alara's screen, a single new line of text appeared, stark against the black background. "Authentication required? Architect key verification?" Her fingers moved to the keyboard. She typed a single, impossibly long alphanumeric string, a password so complex it looked more like a line of corrupted data. She hit enter. For a split second, nothing happened. The entire system, not just her terminal, but the central server hosting the Aurelian emulation for all contestants, seemed to freeze. The timer on the main screen stopped. The leaderboards went blank. The low hum of the servers in the adjoining room faltered, a skipped heartbeat in the building's technological core. Then, on Alara's screen, two words flashed in brilliant emerald green. "Root access granted." A gasp escaped Leo in the control booth. It was impossible. No one had root access to Aurelian. Not even Mr. Corbin. Only the architect did. Simultaneously, the main leaderboard flickered back to life. But it was different now. The long list of contestants with their rows of zeros was gone. It had been wiped clean, replaced by a single, solitary entry. Contestant: Alara Vance vertical bar progress. 100% vertical bar vulnerability patched. The silence that fell upon the room was not quiet. It was a deafening, physical force, a vacuum that sucked all the air and sound and arrogance out of the space. It was the sound of 100 egos shattering at once. Drake, who had been mid-sentence in his blog post, stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. Brenda, who had been watching with a bored expression, shot upright in her chair, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of her desk. Gus's cynical smirk vanished, replaced by a look of slack-jawed, utter disbelief. They all turned, as one, to look at the back corner of the room. Alara was leaning back in her chair, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The frantic energy of the competition had vanished, and in its place was her profound, unbreachable stillness. She had not just solved the problem, she had transcended it. She had done the impossible, and she had done it with tools they had mocked, using methods they couldn't comprehend. The spell of silence was finally broken by Mr. Corbin's voice, not from the stage, but from the main speakers, amplified from the control booth. His voice was unsteady, filled with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. Pure, unadulterated awe. "Miss Vance," he said, the name that had been spoken with such derision now uttered with a reverence bordering on fear. "Would you mind explaining what just happened?" Alara didn't answer immediately. She methodically ejected the gray USB drive, her movements precise. She slipped it back into the hidden pocket of her backpack. Then, she turned her head slowly, her calm, ash-gray eyes seeming to look past the cameras, past the glass of the control booth, and directly at Mr. Corbin himself. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it carried across the stunned silence of the room with absolute authority. "The vulnerability wasn't a flaw in the code," she said simply. "It was a backdoor. The architect put it there on purpose." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "And it only opens with the right key." The room remained a vacuum of stunned silence, every person frozen, processing the impossible reality that had just unfolded. Alara's words hung in the air, not as an explanation, but as a pronouncement from another realm of understanding. The vulnerability wasn't a flaw, it was a feature, a backdoor, an intentional creation that only its master could access. The implications were staggering. Before anyone could formulate a response, the main doors at the front of the hall slid open with a soft, authoritative hiss. A man stepped inside. He was the antithesis of the assembled crowd. While they were a mix of casual tech wear and sharp business attire, he wore a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit that absorbed the light. He wasn't physically imposing, but his presence commanded an immediate, gravitational authority that made everyone else in the room feel less. His movements were economical, his gaze sharp and sweeping, cataloging every face, every reaction, before finally settling on Station 37. He was Marcus. And as he began to walk a direct, unhurried path toward Alara, a new kind of fear, colder and more profound than mere professional humiliation, began to creep into the room. This was not part of the competition. Mr. Corbin, seeing the intrusion, spoke through the intercom, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual command. "Excuse me, sir. This is a private event. I must ask you to—" "Mr. Corbin," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but carrying an implicit order to be silent. He never broke his stride. "We are aware. Please remain where you are." Brenda, ever the gatekeeper, moved to intercept him, her corporate smile reactivated on pure reflex. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this area is for contestants only. I can direct you to—" Marcus didn't even look at her. He simply held up a hand as he passed, a gesture that was not threatening but was so utterly final that it stopped her dead in her tracks. Her mouth hung open, the rest of her sentence dying in her throat. He continued on his path, the crowd of defeated programmers parting for him like water before the hull of a ship. He stopped in front of Alara's desk. He looked down at her, and for the first time, a subtle warmth entered his expression. "It's time," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. He handed her a slim, matte black tablet. It had no branding, no ports, no buttons. It was a seamless slab of dark glass. Alara took it, her thumb pressing against a corner of the screen. It came to life, not with a welcome screen, but with a single stark emblem. A stylized eagle clutching a bundle of lightning bolts, set against a deep blue field. It was the seal of a government agency so secret that most people in the room wouldn't even recognize it. The National Cyber Defense Directorate. Below the seal was a single line of text. Directive 7. Aurelian Protocol activated. Immediate recall authorized. The tablet was angled just enough for those nearby to see. A wave of dawning, horrified comprehension began to spread. Drake, who was closest, saw the screen and took an involuntary step back, his face a mask of disbelief. This wasn't a competition, it was a test. Or worse, a summons. Mr. Corbin, watching from the booth, finally understood. His face went ashen. The Aethelgard Invitational, his prestigious event, his kingdom of code, had merely been a staging ground. A secure, isolated environment for a ghost to come in from the cold. "The architect," Gus whispered from across the room, his voice trembling as he connected the dots. She's the architect." Alara looked up at Marcus and nodded slightly. Then she began to pack. She unplugged her old laptop with the same methodical care she had used to set it up. The machine they had all mocked, they now realized, was not a relic. It was a bespoke instrument, a master key to the digital kingdom. Her faded backpack, which they had seen as a symbol of poverty, was the go-bag of an operative. As she worked, the consequences of their arrogance began to rain down upon them. The reversal was swift and merciless. Drake stood paralyzed, his world imploding. He had built his entire career, his entire identity, on being the smartest man in the room. He had ridiculed, belittled, and tried to humiliate a woman who was not just his superior, but who operated on a plane of existence he couldn't even begin to comprehend. His blog post, still open on his screen, now read like the pathetic ramblings of a court jester mocking a queen. The sponsorships, the speaking fees, the adulation, he could feel them all turning to ash. Brenda's face had crumbled. Her professional mask had shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. She had tried to have this woman, this asset, ejected for being an inconvenience. She had treated a figure of national importance like a lost tourist. Her career wasn't just over, it was radioactive. Gus, the old veteran, simply slumped in his chair, covering his face with his hands. He felt a deep, profound shame. He, who had always championed substance over style, had been blinded by the most superficial style of all, the style of conformity. He had judged her for not looking the part, while she was the only one who truly embodied it. Alara finished packing. She shouldered her backpack, the old canvas now seeming less like a sign of poverty and more like a mantle of quiet, unassailable power. She and Marcus turned to leave. They didn't look at anyone. There was no gloating. No, I told you so. There was no need. Their silence was more damning than any accusation. It was the silence of a higher authority that had no time to waste on the petty squabbles of lesser beings. As they reached the main doors, Ilara paused. She turned back, not to the contestants, but to the control booth, her gray eyes finding Mr. Corbin's through the glass. "Mr. Corbin," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall, "thank you for providing the secure testing environment. The system is stable now. My report will reflect your full cooperation." It was a professional courtesy, a final, clean closing of the loop. But to everyone else, it was a thunderclap. She wasn't a contestant he had allowed in, he was a contractor she had used. With a final nod, she and Marcus stepped through the doors and were gone. The aftermath was a quiet devastation. No one spoke. The timer on the screen was still frozen, a monument to their failure. The single line on the leaderboard, Ilara Vance, 100% burned into their retinas. They had come here to prove they were the future, only to be rendered obsolete by a ghost from the past. The story of what happened at the Aethelgard Invitational that day was never officially told, but it seeped into the very foundations of their industry. Drake vanished from the public circuit. Brenda was quietly reassigned to a meaningless administrative role in a forgotten department. Gus retired a week later. The story became a modern fable, a cautionary tale whispered in server rooms and at tech conferences. It was a story about a woman who walked into a room full of kings and, without raising her voice, reminded them that they were only playing with toys in a sandbox she had built. The lesson was brutal and clear. In a world obsessed with the shiny, the new, and the loud, true power resides in the quiet corners, in the old code, in the unassuming figures who don't need to announce their greatness because their work speaks for them. They had judged a book by its tattered, worn cover and had been utterly unprepared for the universe contained within its pages. and they would never, ever make that mistake again.